May 24, 1943. The North Atlantic, 400 miles west of Ireland. The sea is calm, which is unusual. Usually the Atlantic is trying to kill you. Tonight it is almost polite. The swells are low and even. The wind has dropped to something manageable, and the surface of the water catches the faint starlight and holds it. On a different kind of night, in a different kind of war, it would be beautiful. A German submarine sits on the surface in the darkness. It is 70 meters long, roughly the size of 2 school buses parked end to end. The hull
of
is black
Mikawa's
and
keen
slick with
eyes,
salt water.
a scant
The deck
9
is
miles
no wider
ahead.
than a hallway.
Once
Below,
again, the
behind
Allied
pressure
forces
hull that
fell
stands
entirely.
Between 52 men and the weight of the ocean, the machinery breathes and hums. The diesels are running on the surface to charge the batteries. When the batteries are charged, they will submerge again. This is the rhythm of the thing. Surface, charge, submerge. Eat, sleep in shifts, surface again. Inside, the men not on watch are doing what submariners do when they are not actively dying. Some are sleeping in the narrow bunks that fold out from the torpedo racks. Some are eating tinned food at the small table near the galley, not talking much. Some are playing cards with the focused quiet of men who have learned that focused quiet is the most reliable way to pass time in a steel tube. They breathe recycled air that smells of diesel and sweat, and the particular dampness that never leaves a submarine no matter the season. They do not talk about depth charges when they are not currently being depth charged. This is also part of the rhythm. The captain is on the bridge. He is 26 years old. He has already completed multiple patrols, which in May 1943 means he belongs to a shrinking category. He has the Iron Cross on his collar, and the particular stillness of a man who has been scared enough times that fear has become something he manages, rather than something that surprises him. He is not scanning the horizon the way the lookouts on either side of the bridge are doing, eyes moving in the slow, trained pattern that might catch a shadow before the shadow becomes an aircraft or a destroyer. He is writing in a journal. The entry he makes tonight is not a tactical assessment. It is not addressed to Admiral Dönitz. It will not be filed with the patrol report, will not be logged by the communications officer, will not be read by anyone during the war. He is writing it because something happened today that cannot go into an official document. Men have been court-martialed for writing what he is about to write. The word the Navy uses is defeatism. The word carries a sentence. He writes anyway. What happened is this. The signal came through from U-boat command in the afternoon. All boats were to withdraw from North Atlantic patrol areas immediately. Return to base for resupply and reassessment. That word, reassessment, doing its careful work in a fleet communication. Admiral Dönitz, the man who had sent them out here with the promise that one more sustained effort would break the convoy routes and starve Britain into negotiations, had ordered the wolf packs home. After 4 years of hunting, after 3,000 Allied ships sent to the bottom, the retreat was dressed in temporary language, and nobody on any submarine in the North Atlantic believed the temporary language for a moment. This captain, sitting on the bridge with the Atlantic calm around him and the diesels running below him, opened his journal and started writing. This is that story. Before we go on, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far this story travels. And if you're loving it so far, join the family by hitting subscribe, because tomorrow, we've got something special lined up just for you. To understand what the captains were feeling that night, you have to understand what they had been feeling 3 years earlier. It was the opposite of dread. It was almost intoxicating. September 1940. The British were alone. France had surrendered in 6 weeks. The Royal Navy was stretched across 3 oceans, trying to protect supply lines to a country being bombed every night. The RAF had held in the summer air battles. Barely, but the sea lanes remained dangerously exposed. And into that exposure sailed the German U-boat fleet. Small in number, outrageously effective, and operating from a stretch of occupied coastline that placed them directly astride the Atlantic routes Britain depended on for everything. They called it Die Glückliche Zeit, the happy time. In the summer and fall of 1940, a handful of U-boat captains sank tonnage that modern readers struggle to absorb. Günther Prien sank over 200,000 tons of Allied shipping. Otto Kretschmer, the greatest of them all, eventually topped 300,000. Joachim Schepke, Victor O'Hearn, Heinrich Bleichrodt. They were sinking ships faster than the British could replace them, and the crews returning to port carried the particular confidence of men who have discovered that what they were trained to do works exactly as advertised. The math was what terrified Allied planners more than any individual sinking. Every ton of food, every barrel of fuel, every crate of ammunition crossing the Atlantic was a calculation. Britain's survival was measured in weeks of stored supplies. If the U-boats held their rate through the winter, the arithmetic pointed in one direction. In Germany, these captains were film stars. Prien got a ticker-tape parade through Berlin after he slipped into the supposedly impenetrable anchorage at Scapa Flow and sank the battleship HMS Royal Oak while she sat at anchor in her home port. Hitler met him for lunch. Goebbels put him on national radio. Children collected cigarette cards with his face on them. Kretschmer, Prien, Schepke. These were names German mothers used to reassure their children that the war was going well, that the men sent to sea were coming back covered in decorations, rather than being pulled from the water. The captains themselves knew the reality was more complicated. They were winning, yes, but with too few boats. Dönitz had been requesting more submarines from Hitler since before the war began. He needed 300 operational U-boats to genuinely strangle Britain's supply lines. In those early months, he had fewer than 30 on patrol at any given time. The victories were real. The scale was not yet what it needed to be. Still, the medals said they were winning. The champagne in Lorient said so. The band on the pier said so. Every time a boat came home. After France fell, the Germans had acquired something operationally priceless. Bases directly on the Atlantic coast. No more sailing around the north of Scotland to reach the hunting grounds, burning fuel and days on transit. The U-boats now operated out of Lorient, Brest, La Rochelle, Saint-Nazaire, ports with massive reinforced concrete bunkers, constructed to protect submarines from Allied bombing. Walls 8 meters thick. The British sent raids against them repeatedly and achieved essentially nothing. The submarines sat safe in their pens, while the bombers turned back toward England. When a boat returned from patrol, there was a band on the pier. Flowers. The admiral himself, sometimes, standing at the foot of the gangway. The crew that had been at sea for weeks, unwashed and smelling of diesel and recycled air, would emerge blinking into the French sunlight, and the band played. The captains, in their private letters during this period, sound almost embarrassed by how well things were going. Eric Top, commanding U-552, wrote to his wife in late 1941, "We cannot keep up with the sinkings. The ocean is full of targets. I worry sometimes that our luck must eventually turn." Most of his colleagues would have called him a pessimist. The prevailing mood was not one that entertained that kind of arithmetic. Then, 1942 arrived, and things appeared to get better still. America entered the war after Pearl Harbor in December 1941. And America, despite having watched Britain nearly get strangled by submarines for 2 full years from a close and instructive distance, had not implemented the convoy system on its own coastline. American cities kept their lights on at night. Allied tankers sailing up the East Coast were silhouetted against the glow of Miami and Jacksonville and New York, their hulls outlined against the light, like targets on a practice range. The U-boats could see them from miles away. The tankers could not see the submarines at all. The Americans called what followed the second happy time. The U-boat captains called it the American shooting season. From January to July 1942, U-boats sank nearly 400 ships along the American coast and in the Caribbean. More than 50 ships a month, sometimes more than 2 per day. Reinhard Hartigan in U-123 surfaced close enough to the American shore that he could see the lights of New York City. He wrote in his logbook, "I have been in this port many times before the war as a merchant sailor. I recognize the skyline. Tonight, I am not a guest." He sank 3 ships that night, including a tanker that lit the horizon like a burning city. The men reading these patrol reports in France shook their heads in admiration. Inside the service, the sense was that victory in the Atlantic was a matter of scheduling, not outcome. Here is where it gets interesting. Here is where the seed of the later reckoning was already in the ground, invisible to almost everyone who was celebrating. Some captains, the ones who read logistics rather than propaganda, who spent their off-patrol hours doing calculations that nobody asked them to do, began running the numbers differently. Yes, they were sinking ships. Record tonnage. But the Americans were building ships faster than U-boats could sink them. The Liberty ship program was producing vessels at a pace that absorbed the losses and kept accelerating. You could sink 4 ships this week and find 6 new ones the following week. The British had already grasped this and adjusted their measurement accordingly. The Germans had not. The tonnage war only worked if you were destroying capacity faster than the enemy could rebuild it. The U-boats were not. They were killing individual ships, while the shipyards in Baltimore and Portland and Wilmington kept expanding shifts and launching new hulls on schedules that had nothing to do with what was happening in the Atlantic. The curve had been going the wrong direction for months, before anyone said so in a room where it might matter. Some officers were quietly running different numbers, and the different numbers did not lead to the same destination as the official ones. They did not say this in formal reports. Defeatism in the Third Reich carried consequences that were not bureaucratic, but in private letters and journals, in conversations that stopped when the wrong person entered the room. Some of the men who were very good at their jobs were starting to understand that being good at your job and winning the war were not the same thing. That you could sink a ship every day for a year and still be losing. That the metric everyone was celebrating, tonnage, kills, patrol reports filed with pride, was measuring the right activity in the wrong direction, against an enemy that had decided the only relevant number was ships built minus ships sunk, and had organized its entire industrial capacity around keeping that number positive. The happy time was real. The kills were real. The courage was real. The outcome was already being written in the shipyards, in the quiet addition of numbers that the parade route in Lorient did not account for, and the band on the pier was not playing loudly enough to drown out. In the fall of 1942, the Allies cracked the Enigma settings for U-boat communications. Convoy routes began to change before the submarines could reach them. New radar technology meant aircraft could find a surfaced U-boat in the dark. The hunter-killer groups got better, faster, more coordinated. The depth charges got more accurate. By May 1943, Dönitz lost 43 U-boats in a single month. He withdrew his fleet from the North Atlantic. Privately, he told his staff the Battle of the Atlantic had been lost. The happy time ended, not with a single defeat, but with the slow arithmetic of industrial capacity catching up to tactical brilliance. The band on the pier kept playing all the way to the end. The champagne kept flowing. The medals kept coming. The ocean, in the meantime, had stopped being full of easy targets. If you want to understand war from the inside, from the men who lived it and died in it and wrote about it privately, you are in the right place. Subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from. 1943 opened with the Battle of the Atlantic at its peak intensity. In March 1943, German wolf packs achieved what looked like their greatest success. Convoys SC-122 and HX-229 ran into concentrated U-boat formations in the mid-Atlantic. Over 4 days, the Germans sank 21 ships, totaling 141,000 tons. It was the largest convoy battle of the entire war. Churchill later admitted that the figures genuinely scared him. He told his war cabinet that the U-boat threat might be the one thing they could not overcome. U-boat command read the results with satisfaction. Dönitz sent a message to the fleet. Victory is close. The enemy is cracking. 3 months later, 41 German submarines were sunk in a single month. This is the number that changed everything. 41, in 31 days. For comparison, in the first 3 years of the war, Germany had lost roughly 100 U-boats total. Now they were losing more than that in a season. More than one a day. The math that had worked so decisively in Germany's favor in 1940 and 1941 was now running in reverse. And the speed of the reversal was something that neither the admirals in Berlin nor the captains at sea had any precedent for interpreting. The captains out in the Atlantic knew something had changed before the statistics arrived in Berlin. They felt it long before anyone put a number to it. Werner Henke, commanding U-515, wrote in his patrol report in April 1943, "Aircraft appearing in positions where no aircraft should be able to reach. Our METOX detectors show nothing, yet they find us. I have no explanation for this that I find satisfying." He was right to be confused. What Henke and his fellow commanders did not know, and would not discover until the war was over, was that their enemy had been reading their mail. The British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the German naval Enigma cipher. Not perfectly, and not always, but enough. Enough to know where the wolf packs were being directed. Enough to route convoys around them before they arrived. enough to vector long-range aircraft and hunter-killer groups to the exact grid squares where U-boats were surfacing to recharge their batteries in the dark. Every operational order, every patrol assignment, every position report had been encrypted and transmitted on the absolute assumption that no enemy could read it. The Germans believed their Enigma machine was mathematically unbreakable. They were wrong. And because they were wrong, they had been sending their men to positions the British already knew about, sometimes for days in advance. The captains, returning from patrol, knew something was off. Too many convoys were not where intelligence said they would be. Too many assignments put the wolf packs in empty ocean. They debated the explanations among themselves. Better Allied aircraft, improved convoy discipline, informants in the French ports. They assembled theories from the evidence they could see, and never guessed the evidence they could not. The centimetric radar accelerated the collapse. The British had developed a radar set, operating on wavelengths that German detection equipment could not register. Submarines carried METOX receivers, which had worked reliably against older Allied radar. Against the new centimetric sets, they were completely blind. A submarine would run on the surface at night, its METOX showing nothing, believing itself safe. The aircraft or destroyer had been tracking it for 15 minutes before the first flare went up. Add to this the closing of the air gap. There had been a stretch of ocean in the mid-Atlantic that no land-based aircraft could reach from Britain, Canada, or Iceland. This had been the Wolfpack's preferred hunting ground for 2 years. Protected, in early 1943, the British deployed very long-range Liberator bombers that could finally cover it. Combined with escort carriers that brought aircraft directly into the convoy lanes, the ocean that had once belonged to the submarines was suddenly patrolled at all hours. The one place the U-boats had been able to operate with relative freedom was gone. Erich Topp, one of Germany's most experienced commanders, wrote later of this period, "We were losing boats too fast to train replacements. The boats that survived were commanded by men with far less experience than the year before. The sea had changed and we had not changed fast enough with it." Dönitz's son-in-law, Günther Hessler, who served on U-boat staff, wrote in internal memos that the sinkings were reaching a rate incompatible with the continuation of the campaign. He chose his words carefully, as any man in that position had to. But incompatible with the continuation of the campaign means exactly what it sounds like. May 24, 1943. The orders came in the afternoon. All North Atlantic boats were to withdraw from patrol areas. Return to base for resupply and reassessment. There was no dramatic announcement, no formal statement from Berlin. Just a signal from Beijing in the flat bureaucratic language of naval operations. Pull back. The word temporary appeared in the message. The captains were not deceived by it. This was the same Beijing that had described the losses of April as acceptable attrition. The same command that had told them in March, after the convoy battles, that victory was close. The word temporary was doing a great deal of work in that signal. It was carrying the weight of 41 boats in 31 days. It was carrying the weight of 500 men at the bottom of the Atlantic in May alone. One word, 4 syllables, and everyone who read it understood exactly what it was not saying. One captain, writing in his journal that evening, recorded what the signal meant in plain language. Dönitz has accepted what we have known for weeks. We cannot fight this battle with the tools we have. Then he wrote something that would not appear in any official document. He wrote, "I count my classmates. 22 men I trained with at Kiel finished the course with me in 1939. I know of 4 who are still alive. The other 18 are at the bottom of the Atlantic. I have not made a full accounting because I am afraid the actual number is lower than 4. He wrote that sentence and then stopped. According to his daughter, the next line in the journal is a date, written the following morning. Whatever he felt after putting that on paper, he did not follow it further. Some things, even in a private journal, you do not pursue to their end. He returned to the entry that night. The final lines are in slightly different handwriting, written under different light, probably after the rest of the crew had gone below. He wrote, "The band will play when we come back to Lorient. They will play because they have to. But I notice that the men in the band have stopped looking us in the eyes." His daughter, who published the journal in the 1980s, said she still cannot read those 2 sentences without putting the book down. The band plays. That detail is the one that does not release. Not the casualty count, not the failed arithmetic, not the word temporary, performing its dishonest work in a naval signal. The band plays. That was the ceremony, the ritual, the pageantry of men returning from the sea. It had been that way since the beginning of the campaign, the brass instruments and the flags, the officers on the dock, and the families permitted behind the barriers. But somewhere in 1943, in the concrete bunker ports of occupied France, the musicians stopped meeting the eyes of the men they were welcoming home. They knew. Everyone in those ports knew. The music continued anyway. To understand the full weight of that moment, you need to understand what it meant to be a U-boat captain in 1943. It was the highest risk assignment in any military in the history of warfare. That is not an overstatement. The statistics, assembled after the war, are almost too extreme to absorb. Of approximately 39,000 men who served in the German U-boat arm, roughly 28,000 never came home. 75%, 3 out of every 4. The next highest casualty figure for any comparable fighting force in the war is significantly lower. When a U-boat was sunk, the chances of survival were roughly 9%. 9% late in the war. The boat that goes down in deep water takes everyone with it. Depth charges crush the pressure hull. The men have seconds, maybe less. The sea temperature in the North Atlantic in winter is cold enough to kill a man in 15 to 30 minutes, even if he reaches the surface. The captains knew all of this. They had gone through submarine school with men who were now dead. They attended farewell dinners that had become, without anyone saying it, last suppers. The U-boat bases developed a particular gallows humor about this. Officers stopped saying, "See you when you get back." They said, "See you on the next one," which technically implied that the current patrol would be survived, but left the future open. There was a phrase that circulated in the bunkers in 1943, Himmelfahrtkommando. It means journey to heaven detail. The crews quietly gave this name to patrols nobody expected to return from. By 1943, it applied to most patrols. How do men function under these conditions? The answer, based on what the surviving captains wrote, is that they split themselves in two. There was the professional, who read charts and calculated fuel consumption and wrote measured patrol reports. And there was the private man, who wrote in journals and letters what the professional could not acknowledge. Reinhard Hartigan, who had surfaced off New York and seen the skyline glow, wrote to a friend in Germany as the war turned. "We are required to believe things that we know are not true. This is an exercise in mental discipline that I find increasingly exhausting." He could not say more than that in a letter passing through censorship. But his friend, who preserved the letter, said he understood immediately. The official bulletins were lying. Everyone in the U-boat service knew they were lying. And knowing this, while being unable to say it was its own kind of warfare. Peter Kremer, commanding U-333, nearly lost his boat 3 times in 1943. He survived the war and wrote about the period in his memoir. He described a meeting in the officers' mess, at the base in Brest, late in 1943, where a group of senior commanders sat together for dinner. Someone opened a bottle of cognac. Someone started reading names. Not names of Allied ships sunk. Names of boats that had not come back. Names of commanders who had been classmates, messmates, friends. They went through 40 names before someone told the man reading to stop. "We drank the cognac," Kremer wrote. "We did not speak for some time. Then someone said, 'At least they went quickly,' and we all understood that this was the only consolation available, and that it was not much of a consolation." The mechanics of the realization are worth examining closely. The captains did not all arrive at the same conclusion on the same night. It was a gradual accumulation, a series of small understandings that built until the weight of them could no longer be denied. For some captains, the first crack was the radar. Before the centimetric radar arrived, U-boats had a reliable warning system. When an Allied aircraft turned on its radar to search for submarines, the Matox detector would pick up the signal and give the boat 60 to 90 seconds of warning. Enough to dive, enough to survive. Then attacks started happening without any warning at all. Boats were getting caught on the surface by aircraft that appeared without a single ping on the detector. No time to dive. Just the roar of engines and then the depth charges and the fire. The captains reported this in their logs with the careful precision of men trained to document facts without drawing premature conclusions. They described the anomaly. They asked for an explanation from U-boat command. The explanations they received were either wrong or evasive. Nobody told them that their Enigma traffic was being read. That information would have caused a panic in the fleet. So the captains watched their radar detectors show nothing, while aircraft killed their comrades. And they drew the only conclusion available to men, without the true explanation. The enemy knows where we are. They did not know how. But they knew. Kurt Dobratz, who commanded U-1232, wrote after a particularly hard patrol, "I have begun to feel that they are waiting for us. Not that they encounter us. That they are waiting. There is a difference. And I cannot explain it." He was right. They were waiting. For other captains, the moment of understanding came through simple arithmetic. Specifically, the arithmetic of who was left. A Kapitanleutnant, commanding a U-boat in 1943, had typically been in the service since 1939 or 1940. He had trained with a cohort. He had served with men he knew. As 1943 progressed, he was watching that cohort disappear. One captain's diary, recovered after the war and published without the author named at the family's request, contains an entry from September 1943 that reads like an accounting ledger. The captain had listed, in alphabetical order, every officer he had trained with in Kiel. Beside each name, he wrote either "still serving" or a date. The dates were when the person had died or been reported missing. He had crossed out 37 names. 4 remained uncrossed. At the bottom of the page he wrote, "I do not know what to call this. We are told we are winning. These men are dead. I cannot reconcile these facts." What made it harder to process was the gap between the official story and the private reality. Goebbels' propaganda machine was extraordinarily effective at its job. The newsreels showed U-boats departing for patrol to stirring music. They showed victory flags raised on returning boats, 1 pennant per ship sunk. They showed the medals and the handshakes and the admirals beaming. What they did not show was that by late 1943, many boats were going out on patrol and simply not coming back. No final signal, no distress message, no bodies, just silence. And then, after a reasonable interval, a notification to the family. The notification letters were, by official policy, written to say that the sailor had fallen for Führer and fatherland. They did not describe what the death had been like. They could not. No one knew. Inside the U-boat service, the men knew that fallen for Führer and fatherland meant the pressure hull had been crushed at 200 meters by a pattern of depth charges. The men inside had died in a fraction of a second if they were lucky, or drowned in the dark if they were not. The letters home became a form of literature in themselves. They had to pass censorship. They could not mention operational details, positions, convoy contacts, or losses. So captains and officers wrote in code. Not military code, emotional code. Eric Topp wrote to his wife in the autumn of 1943, "I think often of the garden. I think of how ordinary life looks from here. Please tell the children that their father remembers them at all times. If there are photographs, keep them somewhere safe." Topp survived the war. He recognized later that the letter read, in retrospect, like a goodbye. He said, "I did not intend it as a goodbye, but I was writing it in the knowledge that it might be." That changes how you put words together. Peter Kremer's letters home during the same period contain references to small personal items. Where his watch was kept, what should be done with his books, whether his brother knew where the legal documents were. Nothing a censor would flag. Everything a wife would understand. A woman named Ingeborg, whose husband commanded U-614, kept a letter he wrote her in August 1943 until her death in 1987. The letter was published, with her family's permission, in a German naval history journal. Her husband did not come home from that patrol. The letter reads, in part, "I have been thinking about what it means to be afraid. Not the immediate fear, the fear of depth charges or fire, which is sharp and passes. The background fear, the one that is always present now, the one that makes you careful about what you say and to whom. I am afraid, in a way that has become ordinary, if that makes sense. I wake up afraid. I do not talk about it, because the men need something from me that I cannot give them if I show them what I actually think about our chances." He did not say what he thought about their chances. He did not need to. The letter survived because his wife folded it into the cover of a prayer book and never showed it to anyone for 40 years. Not all the captains wrote in this key. Some wrote with the specific, sharp humor of men who have stared at something long enough to find it absurd. A diary kept by a watch officer, not a captain, but a man who served on 3 different boats and survived all 3, contains an entry from July 1943 that has become something of a historical curiosity. He wrote, "Today I attended a briefing in which we were told that the losses of May represent a temporary setback caused by specific technical factors that are being addressed, and that the outlook for the second half of the year is positive. I counted the officers in the room. 21. I calculated how many of us will be alive by the second half of next year. I did not share my calculation." He did not record what the calculation was. He did not need to. Anyone in that room in July 1943 could have done the same arithmetic on the back of a napkin. The loss rate for the preceding 2 months meant that of 21 officers sitting in a briefing together, the expected survivors by mid-1944 numbered somewhere between 3 and 6, depending on how charitable you were feeling toward probability. The briefing officer, apparently, was feeling very charitable. 2 paragraphs after the calculation he did not share, the watch officer wrote, "The cook has found a French chicken. There is no good reason to be unhappy about chicken." The chicken appears twice more in his diary, over the following pages. Once when it was being prepared, once when it was eaten. He recorded the meal with the same seriousness he brought to operational notes. The seasoning, the quality of the bread alongside it, whether the wine the cook had also found was worth drinking. It was worth drinking. He was clearly aware of the absurdity of writing, "The chicken was good," in the middle of a private reckoning with mortality. He leaned into it deliberately. The chicken was a way of saying, "I know what I know, and since knowing it changes nothing, I might as well eat." There is a long tradition of this in wartime writing. Men who have absorbed the worst information available and responded by becoming very precise about small pleasures. The chicken, the wine, whether the bread was fresh. These details are not evasions. They are the evidence of a man still paying attention to the world, which is its own kind of answer to the question the briefing officer was not asking. Dönitz, to his credit, knew what his men knew. He was not a stupid man, and he was not insulated from the losses. He had lost his own son in a U-boat in 1944. He received the patrol reports personally. He read the loss statistics with his own eyes. His private diary entries during this period are notably different in tone from his official communications to Hitler and the Naval High Command. In public memos, he was optimistic. New technology was coming. Better torpedoes. The snorkel, which would allow submarines to run on their diesel engines while submerged. Newer, faster boats. Victory was still possible with patience. In his private diary, he wrote in the summer of 1943, "I ask myself what I owe to these men. I send them on patrols that I know are dangerous, beyond what any service should ask. They go. They do not refuse. They sing when they leave port. I do not know how to face them sometimes." He did not change the orders. He could not. The strategic situation required U-boats in the Atlantic. If they withdrew entirely, the Allies would shift enormous naval resources to other theaters. The pressure was still, in theory, worth something. But he knew what his captains were writing in their journals. And they knew that he knew. There is a letter from a Kapitänleutnant to Dönitz, written in October 1943, and preserved in the Naval Archives at Freiburg, that captures this dynamic exactly. The officer wrote, "I have been asked by my crew whether the new technology you have promised will arrive before our next patrol. I told them I believed it would. I want you to know, sir, that I told them this because I did not have a better answer. I would appreciate any information that would allow me to say something true." The letter is remarkable not because of what it says, but because of what it is. A junior officer asking his supreme commander to stop lying to him. In the Third Reich, during wartime, and keeping a copy. Dönitz did not reply in writing. Whatever he said was spoken, if he said anything at all. The officer went on his next patrol and came back. He survived. By late 1943 and into 1944, the U-boat arm had been transformed from the force that nearly strangled Britain into something closer to a fleet of decoys. The boats were still sailing. They still had to sail. Hitler demanded it. Dönitz demanded it. The strategic calculus, flawed but real, was that even if the submarines were not sinking many ships, their presence forced the Allies to devote enormous resources to anti-submarine warfare. Convoys needed escorts. Escort carriers needed aircrew. Destroyer crews needed training and deployment. All of that could theoretically have been pointed elsewhere. The captains understood this argument. They did not find it especially comforting. What it meant in practice was that they were sailing on patrols they did not expect to survive for the purpose of making the enemy spend money and time killing them. The euphemism used was tying down Allied resources. The men in the submarines had another name for it that was not used in any official document. One captain's diary from this period, a man who completed 6 patrols and survived the war, contains a list he started keeping in the autumn of 1943. He titled it, in the margin of a page, "Things I Plan to Do When the War is Over." The list includes, visit my mother, sleep for 1 week, read the books in my father's library, learn to play chess properly. He updated the list periodically. Additions appear in different ink colors as the months passed. Some items are crossed out, not because they had happened but because, reading the context, he had apparently decided they were too optimistic to include. At the bottom of the final version of the list, dated sometime in early 1945, he added one item in larger handwriting than the rest. Be alive. The snorkel, when it finally arrived in numbers in late 1944, changed the texture of the experience without changing the outcome. The snorkel was a tube that could be raised above the surface, while the submarine stayed submerged. It allowed the diesel engines to run, which meant the boat could stay underwater almost indefinitely, instead of surfacing every night to recharge batteries. It solved, in theory, the problem of being caught on the surface by Allied aircraft. The captains who received the snorkel-equipped boats found it both useful and horrible. Useful, because it kept them alive longer. Horrible, because it meant they now spent entire patrols underwater, never surfacing, never seeing daylight, navigating by instruments in a steel tube for weeks at a time. One commander wrote after his first snorkel patrol, "I have been at sea for 41 days. I have not seen the sky in 41 days. The men are pale as paper." 2 have what I can only describe as mental disturbances, that I am managing as discreetly as possible. The snorkel works. We survived. I do not know how to explain to anyone who has not done this what 41 days without sunlight in a space the size of a large hallway feels like. The war diaries from these late war patrols have a different quality from the earlier ones. Less tactical analysis, more introspection. Some of it is remarkably lucid in the way that exhausted, frightened, highly intelligent men sometimes become lucid. A watch officer aboard a snorkel boat wrote in January 1945, "I have been thinking about what it means that we are still doing this. The war is clearly lost. Everyone on this boat knows it. Nobody says it. We received an order today to proceed to a grid square and await convoy traffic. We will proceed. We will await. There will likely be no convoy because the convoys now travel in routes we cannot predict. We will return to base having accomplished nothing except surviving. And then someone will give us another assignment and we will go again. I am trying to understand my own willingness to do this. I have not found a satisfying explanation." He had found the question that captains had been circling since May 1943. Not what is the military situation. Not can we win. Why are we still going? The answers varied. Some men went because of their crews. The captain who refuses to sail abandons his men to a replacement who may not know them, may not know how to read the boat, may not make the calls that keep 51 men alive. The crew believed in the captain. Leaving felt like a betrayal. Some men went because the alternative was a court-martial, though this was rarely discussed openly. Some men went because they genuinely did not know what else to do. They had been in the service since they were 19. The war was their entire professional life. What did you do when you refused the war? And some men went because, at the deepest level, they had made their peace with the possibility that they would not come back. And peace of that kind is, once made, surprisingly durable. Peter Kretschmer wrote, 40 years after the fact, about the particular psychology of the U-boat captain in 1944 and 1945. You reached a point where the fear stopped being acute. Not because the danger was less, it was more, but because you had looked at the worst possibility for so long that it stopped being a possibility and became something more like background weather. You dressed for it. You moved around in it. It was no longer news. The end of the U-boat war came in pieces rather than all at once. Germany surrendered in May 1945. The U-boats at sea received the order to surface, raise a black flag, and proceed to the nearest Allied port. Some did. Many were deliberately sunk by their own crews, in a mass scuttling called Operation Regenbogen, Rainbow. The admirals ordered against it, then changed their minds, then changed them back. Some commanders sank their boats. Others sailed into Allied harbors and handed themselves over. The survivors, the 9% who had made it through, gathered in prisoner of war camps in Britain and the United States. Freed from censorship, freed from the requirement to perform optimism, they talked. Otto Kretschmer, who had been captured in 1941 when U-99 was sunk, had spent the entire later war in a British POW camp. He received news about the Battle of the Atlantic through interrogators and Red Cross channels. By the time the surviving captains arrived in British camps, Kretschmer was something like an elder statesman. He had been there longest. He had processed everything longest. He told a British naval intelligence officer in 1945, "I knew by early 1943 that we had lost. Not because of any single thing, because of all the things together. The way the convoys kept not being where they should be. The way our positioning was always slightly wrong. The way we lost men faster than we could produce men. The mathematics were not difficult." He paused, according to the British officer's notes from the interview, and then said, "The difficult part was not the mathematics. The difficult part was going on patrol after you have done the mathematics." Erich Topp, who survived the entire war and later became an admiral in the post-war German Navy, spent much of his later life giving lectures and writing about the U-boat campaign. He was asked many times when he knew. He always gave the same answer. He said the moment he knew was not Black May. It was not any specific sinking or loss. It was a morning in June 1943, when he walked to the window of his quarters at the base and watched a boat leave port for patrol, and thought, quite clearly and quietly, "I do not expect to see those men again. Not that particular boat," he said in one interview. "I thought that about boats in general. I had stopped expecting them to come back. When that happens, when you stop expecting the routine to hold, you have understood something that has not yet been said aloud." He added, "It takes some time after you understand something before you are able to write it down. Writing it makes it permanent. Most of us were not ready for it to be permanent." End quote. The journals and diaries of U-boat captains, the ones that survived, the ones families kept in drawers and attics and eventually donated to naval archives, share a quality that sets them apart from other wartime documents. They were written by men who knew that what they were writing could not be shown to anyone while the war lasted. This freed them. Not completely, not in all cases. The habit of institutional caution does not vanish overnight. But in the private journals, more than in any official record, you find the men behind the commanders. You find the man who counted his surviving classmates and could not bear to finish the count. You find the watch officer who took comfort in a French chicken. You find the captain who kept a list of things to do after the war and added, "Be alive" at the bottom. You find Ingeborg's husband, who wrote about the two kinds of fear and folded the letter into a prayer book. You find the officer who asked Donitz, in writing, with a copy kept, to please say something true. These are not the documents of men who believed they were losing. These are the documents of men who knew they had already lost and were trying to find something to hold on to in the space between the knowledge and the end. They held on to their crews. They held on to routine. They held on to dark humor and chicken and letters home that said everything without saying anything. They held on to the professional discipline of men trained to manage fear, and found, when fear reached a certain magnitude, that the training still mostly worked, and some of them held on to their notebooks. Writing it down, even if it could not be read yet, was its own form of survival. The act of putting words on the page said, "I was here, I thought this, it happened." After the war, the German naval archives opened. Historians began reading the patrol reports, the personal diaries, the private letters. What they found, again and again, was the gap between what had been said officially and what had been thought privately. Donitz himself, who lived until 1980 and spent considerable energy defending his wartime decisions, was asked in a 1975 interview whether he believed, in 1943, that the U-boat war could still be won. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I believed that we had to continue. Whether I believed we would succeed is a different question." He did not answer the different question. The surviving captains answered it for him. In memoirs and interviews and academic papers gathered over the following decades, they answered what Donitz deflected. They said, "We knew. we knew in 1943. Some of us knew earlier. The war at sea was decided by technology, mathematics, and the industrial capacity of the United States. And none of those factors could be changed by courage or skill, or the willingness to keep dying. We went on, because we went on, because the men needed us to, because we did not know how to stop. Herbert Werner, who wrote one of the most significant U-boat memoirs to come out of the war, put it this way: "A submarine is a closed world. Whatever you know, your men know. Whatever you feel, they feel. The captain's job is to be the last one to show it." Some of us were better at this than others. All of us reached the point where we were acting more than we were feeling. We had accepted the result. We had not accepted the end of the duty. He thought for a moment and added, "There is probably a word for this. I do not know what it is. There may not be a word for it. For the condition of knowing something is lost and continuing, because the men beside you need you to continue. For the habit of duty that runs deeper than outcomes. For the act of writing the truth in a notebook at midnight on the bridge, and then going out the next morning and holding a different face for 52 men who require it from you. The journals say, we knew. The patrols say, we went anyway. What sits between those two facts is not a military question. It belongs to a different category entirely, the kind that still resists clean answers decades later. In the reading rooms of naval archives where the notebooks are stored in acid-free boxes, and the men who wrote in them are long gone. Historians can date the entries, cross-reference the patrol logs, verify the positions against Allied intercept records. What they cannot do is fully account for what it cost to write one thing at midnight and perform another at dawn, repeatedly, for months, while the classmates you trained with in 1939 disappeared one by one into the Atlantic. 41 submarines in 31 days, 500 men in May alone. The arithmetic was not complicated. Everyone who needed to understand it understood it. The band played when they came back to Lorient. It played because it had to, because that was the ceremony, and the ceremony did not stop simply because what it was marking had changed in character. But the men in the band had stopped looking them in the eyes. That detail outlasts the statistics. It outlasts the tactical analysis and the command decisions, and the technical explanation of centimetric radar and closed air gaps. The numbers belong to history. The averted eyes belong to something that does not have an archive. If you've been watching this channel for a while and still haven't subscribed, now is the moment. Hit the button, turn on the notification bell, and join the community. We are here every day with the military history stories that deserve to be told straight, without softening what was hard, and without forgetting what was, in its own way, exactly right. Thank you for watching. Respect the fallen, honor the veterans, and never forget what they were fighting against. We will see you in the next video.